My name is Renata Dalaqua, and it's a pleasure to welcome you to today's side event on the CCM, Gender and Diversity in the CCM. We're very happy to have the opportunity to have this discussion. For those of you who don't know me, I work at UNIDIR, where I lead the Gender and Disarmament program. UNIDIR is one of the co-organizers of this event. Actually, this event is a collaborative endeavor, different actors coming together to reflect on the progress made so far in terms of gender and diversity mainstreaming in the CCM, but also considering avenues for further strengthening this agenda. And the organizers of the event are the Gender and Diversity Working Group, the Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining, the International Gender Champions Disarmament Impact Group, the gender focal points of the CCM, which are the Permanent Mission of France and the Permanent Mission of Namibia. We hope today's side event will provide an informal setting for a very important discussion. I know in this morning we had the formal discussion within the CCM, but we think it's important to continue discussing these issues, and perhaps we can make reference and continue the dialogue that already started this morning in the CCM. In this regard, I would just like to say that we are very honored to have Ambassador Aidan Lido joining the event today. He is the chair, the president of the CCM Meeting of States Parties. He will be delivering closing remarks, as you may have seen in the, hello, Ambassador, as you may have seen in the program. But I'm getting, ahead of myself. I should say a few words about the program of today's event. So we'll start with, the program is divided in opening remarks, panel discussion, Q&A, and closing remarks. So first I will introduce the opening speaker. After his intervention, I will introduce the panelists that we have here today, and I will also provide instructions for the Q&A. I think by this point, we're all very familiar with Zoom, but just allow me to say a few words. If possible, we recommend that you put your name and your organization, mission, or the organization you work with. If you can, it would be great if you can leave your camera on, but please mute yourself if you're not speaking. With this, allow me to introduce our opening speaker, Ambassador Stefano Toscano. He is the director of the Geneva International Center for Humanitarian Demining, and he is also an international gender champion. Ambassador Toscano has extensive experience in arms control and disarmament, in multilateral diplomacy, in human security affairs. Previously, he worked with the Swiss MFA on issues related to small arms and light weapons, humanitarian policy and migration, and human security. Ambassador, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Renata. Thank you for your kind introduction. Mr. President, dear colleagues, dear ladies and gentlemen, it is my real pleasure to open this important side event today, to be here and to open the side event. And let me start by thanking the panelists, whose insight we will surely all learn from. Thank you to everyone who make themselves available to join us today, for your interest and for the upcoming discussion, which is going to be interesting for sure. Today we will discuss, as mentioned by Renata, what is the current state of gender and diversity mainstreaming in the CCM. There is increasing evidence that cluster munitions result in consequences that are highly different based on a person's gender identity and expression, and how these intersect with other identity factors such as age, disability, language, and race. Gender norms and diversity considerations often overlap and affect the way individuals or groups experience power or risk. And they do so by affecting their exposure or response to an accident, as well as through the impact such an event might have on their life or their family. As we work to rid the world of the scourge of cluster munitions, our efforts should equally benefit everyone and respond to the real needs of the population in affected communities, in accordance with the humanitarian principle that guide mine action. The GICHD applauds the stronger and more meaningful commitment to including gender and the diverse needs of population within the Convention, following the last year's review conference. It is of great significance that the imperative of efficiency does not overshadow that of equality and inclusion, sometimes at the expense of greater effectiveness. The integration of specific actions and related indicators on gender and diversity mainstreaming in the Lausanne Action Plan is a much welcome step in that regard. The GICHD commends the firm commitment and hard work of the institution represented here today by our esteemed panelists. France and Namibia, in their role as gender focal points of the Convention, and the informal gender and diversity working group that the GICHD is a member of, have provided invaluable support to states, parties, and operators in the implementation of the gender and diversity provisions in the Lausanne Action Plan. And this, I'm referring here to the first year since its adoption. I'm also pleased to see among the panelists today representation from the Mine Action Fellows Program, a group of young campaigners from all over the world who are passionate about disarmament. Before giving the floor to our moderator and panelists, I'm delighted to take this opportunity to announce that in the framework of the long-standing cooperation between the IGC Disarmament Impact Group, UNIDIR, and the GICHD, we have jointly developed a fact sheet highlighting the links between the CCM and gender equality and inclusion. The document, which is available for public consultation, offers evidence on the differentiated impacts of cluster munitions on diverse population groups and identify entry points and areas for action for gender and diversity mainstreaming in line with the CCM and the Lausanne Action Plan. I trust you will find the document useful. Thank you so much, and the floor is back to you, Renata.
Thank you very much, Ambassador, for these inspiring words. And thank you for mentioning the fact sheet. If you haven't done so, I encourage everyone to have a look at the fact sheet. It was a pleasure working together with the GICHD team on this product, and we hope you find it useful for this conference and beyond. Now allow me to introduce our panelists. We'll have three very knowledgeable speakers joining us today. First, we will hear from Roxana Bobolicu, who is International Policy Manager at MAG and also a member of the Gender and Diversity Working Group. She has worked in the mine action sector for over 8 years in a range of roles covering policy as well as government relations. Then we will hear from Inès Mensah, from the French mission and also a gender focal point for the CCM. And it will be very interesting to hear about all the work that France and Namibia have been doing as gender focal points. Their presentation will be followed by an intervention from Jany Saade, who is a volunteer at the university. Okay, now I need to ask you to forgive me for the pronunciation, but let's say Balamand Landmines Resource Center in Lebanon. And Jany is also a member of the Mine Action Fellows program with Mine Action Canada. And as part of her volunteer work, she has gained experience in mine risk education, data collection, and advocacy. And she will also be sharing some insights from her experience with us today. So after these presentations, we will have a Q&A. And anyone can take the floor during the Q&A. If you'd like to take the floor, you can raise your virtual hand, or you can type your name in the chat, or you can put your questions directly in the chat as you prefer. And don't feel like you have to wait until the Q&A to put your questions. We'll be paying attention to the chat at all times. We'll do our best to respond to as many questions as possible, and we also apologize in advance if any question is left unaddressed due to time constraints. But anyway, let's get started. So Roxana, to kick us off, I would like to ask if you could share insights from your work with the Gender and Diversity Working Group. What are the main opportunities as well as the main challenges you see for gender and diversity mainstreaming in the CCM?
Thank you so much, Renata. First of all, let me say it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you so much for the invitation. I am delighted to represent the Gender Working Group here today. I would actually like to talk a bit about a recent workshop that the Gender Working Group organized at the end of May. The workshop was co-sponsored by the UK and Colombia as president of the Convention on Cluster Munitions and the Anti-Personnel Mine Ban Convention. The workshop was structured around the Lausanne Action Plan and the Oslo Action Plans and the gender and diversity provisions and indicators in those instruments. So they explored all the aspects of convention implementation, including survey and clearance, risk education, victim assistance, international cooperation and assistance. And we also looked, of course, at the participation of women, both in mine action more broadly and also in convention meetings. So it was really a really interesting opportunity to get practitioners together representing both operators, but also mine action authorities, as well as donors and also, of course, survivor organizations. And I would just like to highlight a few points that came out in the workshop and a few recommendations. In the interest of time, I'll try to pick just a few that I feel are essential. But there is a report from the workshop that summarizes some of the key findings, and I will put a link in the chat afterwards, and I encourage everyone to have a look at that. So one of the first things that I want to mention that Ambassador Toscano also referred to earlier, and it might seem evident to many, but not to everyone. We cannot say it enough that gender mainstreaming is not just a matter of doing the right thing, not just a matter of principles, but it is essential for improving effectiveness in mine action. So a lot of the presentations and the discussions that came up in the workshop showed exactly why that is. So just to give a very brief and general example, just to illustrate how different gendered roles can influence different kind of behaviors. It can mean that, for instance, in some communities, boys are responsible for grazing animals, while women are responsible for collecting firewood. So that means that because of their different patterns of behavior and mobility, they will be exposed to different kinds of risks. So that means that, for instance, risk education needs to be tailored to those kinds of behaviors, but they might also have different kind of information on contamination. So it's not just that we want equality because it's the right thing, and it is, but if we don't consult with all the members in the community, then we are going to miss out on contamination. Then our contamination baseline will not be accurate. So I think that came very, very clearly in the presentations and the discussions that it's really important so we can do our jobs properly, and something that we can never say enough, though it might seem fairly evident. And that also touches onto the second point that, again, it's been mentioned briefly, and we cannot emphasize it enough. We talk a lot about gender, and I think we're starting to understand and appreciate the importance of this, but it doesn't and it shouldn't really come alone. We should really consider other factors of identity, other diversity considerations that are also very, very important for our work. So just to mention one of the examples that was presented during the workshop by one of our colleagues at HI, an intersectional approach, or an approach that considers diversity, would mean understanding that a woman with a disability living in a rural area that is from an ethnic minority group is more likely to be excluded in mine action activities compared to other women. We cannot treat all women the same way because there can be multiple levels of stigma and discrimination that come from other aspects of diversity. And in order to reach that woman that is already likely to be excluded, we need to tailor our activities. That takes me to the third point that came across very clearly in the workshop, and that is adaptation. So we really need to constantly assess how we are implementing operations and constantly improve. There is always room to do better. So good practice would mean asking ourselves, are the meeting times that we have with communities, are they appropriate? Are the spaces appropriate? Are we accidentally excluding people that might have low levels of literacy? People that might speak a different language? Are our materials accessible to persons with disabilities? We need to constantly ask ourselves these questions, and we need to make improvements to ensure that all groups in the community participate. So that is just a very simple example, but then also this translates to how we configure our teams, because we often look a lot at the project design, and then sometimes the employment aspect is secondary. But employment is really, really important because we need to consider, are our teams recruited from the local communities? Can they actually speak all the languages? Can they make themselves understood and accepted? So we need to then factor that into our recruitment and human resources process. So that is another key aspect. And then one that is definitely an area for improvement for everyone in the sector is about how we use the access that we have, the power that we have to transform gender norms. I have, in my years of trying to promote gender equality in the sector, often heard, well, why does it matter who gets the mines out of the ground as long as the mines are out of the ground, right? But these employment opportunities that our sector provides are really important because they enable socioeconomic inclusion and independence for women, providing them with a steady income. That can be a way for them to avoid gender-based violence by having that kind of independence. So it's really important to consider the socioeconomic impact of our work on these communities. And one aspect of the workshop that I really enjoyed, we had an excellent presentation from Cambodia, from the Mine Action Authority there, who is already making significant strides in this sense, and they already prioritize gender equality in their strategy, they have guidelines for gender mainstreaming. They even have a chapter on in their mine action standards. And it's all great. The mainstreaming in policies is an essential element. But then the example that really stuck with me in the workshop was that they established a technical reference group. So they have a group that includes mine action authorities, representatives from relevant ministries, they have operators, they have all the relevant stakeholders in the sector meeting at least once a year in the country to discuss what are their challenges with gender mainstreaming in mine action. What are their best practices? And I wanted to share that example in the hope that it becomes an inspiration for other mine action authorities listening. And just for my final point, I just want to also send a message that it's not just for affected states or operators to, it's not just their responsibility to mainstream gender, but it's also important that donors take this very seriously, and it's important that they take it beyond just a section in the proposals, but budgeting for gender mainstreaming so that the organizations that implement are able to improve the way they apply a gender lens, so that they support national mine action authorities to do better in this area, and also so they support gender assessments and research projects. And we did hear some very interesting presentations from the UK government on how they consider gender mainstreaming in their assessment of proposals. And we also heard, very interestingly, from Canada that provides support for projects that enable the voices of women and marginalized groups to be heard in arms control regimes, to show how they are affected by these issues, and to create an opportunity for these experiences to influence decision making. And I quite like this idea of like making sure that we don't have blind spots, that we don't end up in this echo chamber in our arms control frameworks talking about the issues without having those perspectives from the field. So I think it's great that we have programs like the Mine Action Fellows to help bring youth from mine-affected countries a bit closer to this subject. So I will stop there. I can keep going for a long time, but I am happy to discuss more and answer questions.
Thank you very much, Roxana, for sharing all these very interesting examples that you've collected in your work as part of the Gender and Diversity Working Group. I think there are many things that I find it interesting. And for instance, when you talk about looking beyond the mines and looking also at the socio-economic context, personally, I find that super important because mine action is taking place in societies rebuilding from conflict. And it doesn't really make sense to just look at one issue in isolation from the rest. And there are so many different programs happening on the ground trying to support that community moving forward. And we should try to integrate and build on the synergies between, you know, land clearance and economic empowerment and things like that. I think that has the potential to improve the effectiveness of all these sorts of assistance programs and lead to better results. And it's interesting to see what affected countries, operators are doing in this regard. We also know that diplomats here in Geneva have also been discussing the issue of gender mainstreaming and trying to give it some sort of form and formality. And kind of an innovative approach has been the creation of gender focal points in the convention. So since the adoption of the Lausanne Action Plan, it was decided that coordinators on general status and operation would act as the gender focal points for the convention and provide advice on gender mainstreaming. This is the topic of the second speaker, of our colleague Inès Mensah from the French mission. And together with Namibia, France has been doing this kind of pioneering work, and they presented the terms of reference earlier today. So Inès, if you could share with us a little bit more from the work of the gender focal points, and what do you see as the priorities moving forward?
Okay, well, thank you, Renata, for inviting me. You cannot hear me. You can? Okay, and thank you to Roxana, because she reminds me how gender focal point should be the first, you know, how gender focal point, or the first that still need to learn more about gender, and so how important it is to communicate with civil society and other stakeholders in order to make their work more inclusive. So as you know, this morning the gender focal point had the opportunity to present their work. So if I dare say that I will not repeat the mass, so I will not repeat the sermon. So I will only recall that the project of the year consisted in the reduction of dense terms of reference. And what I'm going to do now is not to present the paper, which many of you already know, but I will try to present the lessons learned from a year of negotiation on this paper, and what it says about what should be our priorities for the year to come. So yeah, so my speech will consist basically in 2 points. First, I will speak about the threats that weigh on gender inclusions in the CCM machinery. And second, I will try to suggest some points that Namibia and France pointed out during the year that should consist in our next priorities. So first, the terms of reference negotiations revealed difficulties related to the inclusion of gender in the convention. The document, if adopted tomorrow, is intended to fill some of the gaps that were already underlined by previous final reports. Some of these difficulties are both already noticed, as I say, by previous conventions, and others were more implicit. So among the already noticed difficulties, the first thing that was raised in 2021 by the final report was, let's say, a lack of interest. The final report says the workload of the coordinators on general status and operation has been very uneven. The TOR strive to remedy this. First, we could understand that the mandate given to the General Status and Operation Committee were sometimes tautological with respect to the committee members, because in the previous years, the mandate was the same of some other committee members, such as universalization or victim assistance. And this year, the task was very new. So the terms of reference aim first of defining what should be the role of gender focal points in order to be to complete and in order to help the other committee members and to better define what should be their action, including regarding to other committee members. The second difficulty that was raised by the previous conventions and review conference was that as the General Status and Operation Committee doesn't have any permanent mandate, as you know, their mandate changes every 5 years with the review conference, it was sometimes hard for them to all the time restart a new mandate. They didn't have the opportunity to capitalize on achievement from previous existing members, and the terms of reference aim at putting the first stone of a building that we hope that next gender focal point will build upon. It's made, the document is made in order to ensure continuity. One more difficulty that was raised by the focal point during the year is that the final report of the second review conference does not give any specific timeline or any specific date given to which extent the members of the General Status and Operation should act as gender focal points. The document says that coordinators on General Status and Operation will act as focal point to provide advice on gender mainstreaming, but it doesn't give any specific dates. So, so the committee, not only the committee doesn't have any permanent mandate, but it doesn't say to which extent after the next review conference, the committee members should still act as gender focal points. So here we could raise some threats. The first one is obviously the outright abandonment of gender mainstreaming within the framework of the convention. And option two, which is much more likable, is that the review conference maintain its decision to make of the committee members the gender focal points of the convention, but in addition to another task. So the threat here is that the gender issue disregard in favor of another mandate. So so these difficulties that were identified gave us some ideas. So that's my second point about what should be done in the future. So maybe you know it, but France in 2022 was a junior member of the convention, and France will chair the committee next year. In accordance with Namibia, who will support its work as part of the Troika, one of the projects of the year to come, we imagine, would be to launch the reflection on how to maintain gender mainstreaming within the framework of the convention after the third review conference. We are lucky. The Geneva Convention, even the humanitarian conventions, give us some ideas of how it could work. We know that in the CCM we have one dedicated committee, especially for gender, but there do exist many other solutions. For example, when it comes to the Ottawa Convention, there are different committees, one on universalization, on victim assistance, on stockpile destruction. And inside each of these committees, there is one country who is assigned as gender focal point. So here we see that we have two different options, but what Namibia and France think is that there should exist many other way of including gender focal points in the convention, many other structures that we could be creative and imagine, and that this solution could be found in other international organizations, for example, the European Union, the African Union. So one of the ideas we start thinking about is convening side events, convening talks and consultations with delegates and civil societies attached to all the international organizations in and out of Geneva, in order to have a fair idea of what could be the different solutions in order to include, again, gender focal point in the machinery of the disarmament of the CCM, sorry. And one last point, which could be a good idea to start thinking about for the years to come, is that as Roxana mentioned it just before, the Laws and Action Plan speaks about gender and diversity. The 2021 final report gives a mandate to the gender focal point that was to work on gender and the diverse needs of population, but it doesn't say specifically diversity. So it's not, of course, it's not the mandate of the gender focal point this year, but again, after the third review conference, it could be great to start thinking about how to better include questions of diversity, gender and diversity in the convention. So this is basically the 2 points on which the future gender focal point will try to work on next year. And yeah, that's pretty everything for me. So thank you for giving me the floor.
Thank you very much, Inès, for sharing the insights from the work that France and Namibia have been doing so far, and for outlining, what lies ahead, the different options for the future, and what are the prospects for continuity, sustainability of this work. Me personally, I think, the work on gender and diversity is already very much integrated on the ground. And as operators have showed, it makes sense from their perspective to continue working like this. So it's a challenge for us to connect the two levels, right? What's happening on the ground with the framework of the convention and how we work here in Geneva, which brings me to the third speaker we have today. And then we are going to open for Q&A. So if you can already start thinking about the questions you'd like to pose, or if you want to put them in the chat. But as was said from the beginning, we have one of the Mine Action Fellows with us, Jany from Lebanon. And I would like to ask Jany if you could, tell us how you think this conversation in Geneva connects with the work you do on the ground with the university in Lebanon. And can you share examples of how gender and diversity considerations play out in your work in Lebanon, Jany?
Hello, thank you, Renata, first of all, for having me here. I'm really delighted to have the opportunity to share my experience as a volunteer in the mine action field, as well as some learnings from the experiences of my fellows at the Mine Action Fellows program with Mine Actions Canada. So first of all, I would like to say that it's always great to see the discussion taking place for reducing inequalities. This gives us as youth a great hope that in the near future, we will be able to see these inequalities being curbed, and also having the confrontation being done about discrimination taking place right now. So in Lebanon, basically, I'm a volunteer with the Landmine Resource Center at the Baramand University. And based on my own experience, I'm involved mainly in mine risk education, as well as advocacy. And also I support in the data collection for projects for victim assistance. So what we try always to do is to have an inclusive approach. So basically in mine risk education, we always make sure that the material is developed in order to have or to reach everyone. So taking into consideration the age, the gender, and also disabilities. So for example, we make sure always to include different kinds of material, like using puppet shows, songs to reach more for children. Also make sure that the language is very well understood by everyone attending. Also, we make sure to use visuals, games, and use like big characters for people who have an impairment or should be able to see better whatever material we are showing. And we also make sure not just the material, but also the logistics are suitable for everyone to attend. So we make sure that the venue is accessible, everything that should be needed for anyone is there. So we could reach the maximum number of people targeted within the area that we are doing the session in. Also, I would like to highlight that many times in rural areas, it is very hard to just rely on virtual sessions or material. So it is also very important for us to be physically present. And this also, in our opinion, helps to reduce this inequality in the chances of having technology and being connected as anybody else. So this is related mainly to our mine action activity, mine risk education activities, but also I'd like to talk about what we do in the victim assistance program. So basically every data collection that we do, we make sure to include people from different groups of population. So as maybe you may know, Lebanon has a very diverse fabric of society. So we have people from different religions, from different ages, from different backgrounds. And this is really important that everyone be included, especially as we know that in the case of any crisis, inequalities are always aggravated. So we think that it is very important to have everyone included while we do the data collection, but also while we do the selection process for the victims assistance projects. And also we make sure that whatever training is given, especially in the field of income generating projects, is suitable also for different genders, to make sure that everyone is having an equal chance to be socially and economically integrated in the society again, and to be supported adequately and equally. So this is basically my experience. I'd like also to highlight something that I heard from one fellow from the Mine Action Fellow Program. She was talking about her home country, and she mentioned that women who are targeted or who are victim of mines or cluster munitions are always marginalized and sometimes deprived of their value. But on contrary, men are considered as heroes and people who are defending the country. So this had made me reflect very hard on the topic. Maybe in Lebanon, we don't see this as much, but it's happening everywhere in the world. So I hope that I made clear what we do on the topic in my country. And thank you so much again for having me here.
Thank you very much, Jany, for sharing these examples. I think they show how, for instance, the issue of stigma is mediated by identity factors, and like gender may shape how survivors are perceived in society. But also it shows that taking gender and diversity considerations into account makes for better assistance to survivors. And I think that's kind of the main point that everyone that works with this likes to emphasize, that this is about delivering better assistance that can reach everyone in the community. So with this, I conclude the segment of presentations. We have about 15 minutes for discussion, and I invite anyone who wishes to ask questions to our panelists, share comments, or reflections. I think it's important, given that the CCM is happening this week, what kind of concrete actions can be taken by states parties, civil societies, and international organizations to advance gender and diversity in the CCM process. And if anyone has ideas of things that could improve and strengthen this agenda, or facilitate the work of the gender focal points, or even lessons from other processes, multilateral processes, of what works and what doesn't work in terms of gender and diversity mainstreaming that may be applicable to the CCM. It would be great to hear from anyone who is joining us today. Let's see, I'll give you some time for anyone to think about questions that they would like to ask. Oh, I see we have a hand from Hiba Gandur. Hiba, the floor is yours.
Hi, thank you so much, Hiba Gandur. I'm a program manager for MAGAN Lebanon, and I'm the Gender and Diversity Coordinator in our program. It's not a question, it's I want to request something from Jany, because I noticed she's working on our gender diversity in Lebanon. What we noticed in Lebanon is that all the initiatives toward gender and diversity are happening solely, like each organization on its own. And there is like minimum coordination among operators. So what we recently did is that we had a coordination with our national authority, which is the Lebanese One Action Center. And we formed a kind of working group from focal points from different organizations, HMA and the civil organization at the same time. And we recently delivered a co-training or a session or a workshop for different organizations around how to mainstream gender. So what I want to request from Jany, I'll be very interested if you can share any way that we can contact you, because I think there are a lot of interesting things we can discuss, and we can think about future coordination if that's possible. Thanks, Renata.
Thank you very much, Hiba, and it's great. I think that's exactly one of the purposes of having the Youth Mind Action Fellows attending the meetings in Geneva and participating, is actually, to make contact, facilitate coordination, and create new opportunities to, strengthen synergies and advance joint projects. So for sure, we can find a way that Jany will share her contact, or you can share via private message, I guess, and you can be in touch. I think coordination is definitely something that is easier said than done, and it's great to have this kind of working groups, or the opportunity to have meetings in the sidelines of multilateral conventions like we are doing today, to give a chance for everybody to be aware of the different initiatives that are ongoing. I'm not sure if one of the panelists would like to take the floor and react to something that was said, or would like to share a bit more from their work. I'd also like to give this opportunity right now. Mm. And I don't know, maybe if some panelists, I don't know if Roxana can talk a bit, also kind of perhaps lessons learned from APMBC and how they connect with the CCM, and how the different kind of, how you see the role of the gender focal points in one convention and the other, and how does that, in your opinion, impact the work on the ground?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you very much, Renata. Yes, and I guess and one point that you mentioned a bit at the beginning was synergies. So I think it's really important that we see synergies, especially in the context of APMBC and CCM, where the provisions in the Oslo Action Plan and the Lausanne Action Plan are actually very well aligned. And especially, in countries that are affected by both types of contamination, organizations will have, and authorities as well, will have a coherent approach to mine action. So I think it's really important that we see this holistically in order to ensure efficiency in the approach and avoid any duplication of efforts. But I think there is also room to go a bit beyond that and seek synergies with other international frameworks. In particular, I would refer back to the paper introduced by the Netherlands at the second review conference of the Convention on Cluster Munitions, and it focuses exactly on that subject, on how to kind of maximize the impact of the work and how states can look at their membership in other international conventions, for instance, on the rights of persons with disabilities, or other, like probably a really good example is also the WPS agenda. So we need to look a little bit outside our mine action silo and build those links a bit more strongly. So I would say that's definitely something everyone should consider and should see it as a benefit of doing gender mainstreaming. And that kind of takes me a little bit to the reporting side of things, because sometimes there is work that is being done and is not necessarily reported. And I think it's really important, both for the Lausanne Action Plan and the Oslo Action Plan as well, that state parties, regardless of whether they are affected states or donor states, that they talk about the work that is being done. Because sometimes you look at the reports and it feels like maybe there's a bit less than the reality, though I appreciate there's still always a long way to go. There's always room for improvement.
Thank you very much, Roxana, for reminding about the synergies with different policy areas. And I think when it comes to WPS, we actually, in our famous fact sheet, I don't know if we'd be able to show it here. We have a section that outlines the synergies between the CCM and the Women, Peace and Security agenda. And we broke in terms of participation and prevention and protection from violence, and then relief and recovery. So I think that's kind of a first framework for us to think about the synergies, and also maybe start bringing WPS experts to CCM meetings and bringing up the topic of cluster munitions and other kinds of explosives into the WPS agenda as well. So I think I'm going to give the opportunity for the other two speakers to say a few words before we go to the closing remarks. Maybe to Inès, as a concluding kind of prompt for you, what would you like to see in terms of, that could advance the work of the gender focal points from now until the end of the Lausanne Action Plan?
Okay, I will maybe point out one thing that I noticed, that I take note of 1 year after 1 year of mandate as a gender focal point, is maybe to have more opportunities, maybe not in formal session, but maybe in informal consultation, for state parties to meet and to exchange on what gender focal points should do or how they should formulate the work in a document that should be adopted by the World Convention. It's because the Lausanne Action Plan shows it. It's possible to have a great success regarding this topic. So it's all about diplomacy. It's all about exchanging, speaking, and finding compromises. So we think it is possible. Everyone has its own national position, of course, but we noticed that there was a really good faith, really good willing of trying to do something and to build something all together. But we missed maybe opportunities in order to meet all together with all the state parties, all interested state parties, not only on bilateral consultations. And that could be also a good idea during these informal talks to include, again, civil society, researchers, youth programs, we saw it today, so for that we have more time and more spaces in order to build something strong for the future regarding gender and diversity. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Inès. Yes, I think maybe that a way also of building more common understanding about the role of the gender focal points. That's a great idea. And now I would like to give the floor for some final words from Jany. And Jany, if you can share with us also your impressions from the Mind Action Fellows program. That's also one aspect of enhancing diversity in our field, is to ensure that the conditions are put in place for young people to engage as well. Jany, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Renata. So basically, I've been with the program for 4 years now, and it was really empowering as a woman in this in the Mind Action field to be able to participate in this project, because, as you said, the program is designed to make it accessible for everyone to be here and to make their voices heard. And the diversity in our group as fellows is really enriching. It adds a lot to our knowledge and to our experience. It's always very impressive to hear about the experience of different people from different backgrounds. And this is what actually helps making the change real and happen fast, because the disconnection with the field will not going to help in us making the word a safer place. It's always needed to have everyone's voice heard and everyone included in the planning, in the implementation, and as well in the reviewing. So the program has been very useful for me on a personal level, and I know from hearing the experience of other fellows how it helped them as well bring new knowledge to their own country and maybe learn some new techniques, some new approaches, and as well being empowered in what they do. So yes, basically that's what I have to do about, what I have to say about this.
Thank you very much, Jany. It's very inspiring to see the fellows, and also to see that the conference is becoming a more inclusive environment as well.